Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. I am coming to you from a very chilly, rainy, cold Southern California, so I'm in this cozy jacket. But today I am covering a case that is officially 25 years old as of yesterday, and it is so highly requested. So we're just gonna dive into it. This is gonna be a long one, but I wanted to cover this here for you guys because, like I said, it's been 25 years and it's still unsolved, and I just think that this can be solved. I truly do. So before I get into it, I did cover this on my podcast, so if you're more into podcasts, go check that out. My co-host and I had a lot of discussion about it as well in the podcast, and I think that's super interesting. So this is going to be a little bit different from the podcast, so you can watch both and get a whole variety of insights into it. So definitely go check that out. I will have it linked in the description box. And without further ado, let's just get into the story. Today, we are covering the murder of JonBenét Ramsey. We're going to start out with a little bit of history on the Ramseys. JonBenét Ramsey was born on December 7th, 1943 in Lincoln, Nebraska to Mary Jane and James Dudley J. Ramsey. In 1966, John graduated from Michigan State University with a degree in electrical engineering, and then in 1971 he graduated again from Michigan State University with a master's degree in business administration. John's father was a decorated World War II pilot, and in 1966 John served as a civil engineer corps officer in the Navy. He was actually stationed in the Philippines for 3 years, and then he was stationed in Atlanta, Georgia for 8 years after that. In 1966, John Ramsey married Lucinda Pash, and together they had 3 kids. The couple ended up getting divorced in 1978, and on November 5th, 1980, John married his second wife, Patricia. Patricia, or Patsy as she was often called, was born in Parkersburg, West Virginia on December 29th, 1956. She was born to Nedra Ellen Ann and Donald Ray Poe, and in 1978 she graduated from West Virginia University with a degree in journalism. The year before Patsy graduated from college, she actually won the Miss West Virginia title, so her family was definitely into the pageant scene. Her sister also won a couple of titles, and this was something that she had done for a lot of her life. Patsy was 23 years old when she met and married John Ramsey, and together they were living in Atlanta, Georgia. On January 27th, 1987, Patsy and John had their first child, Burke Ramsey, and 3 years later, their daughter was born. JonBenét Ramsey was born on August 6th, 1990 in Atlanta, Georgia. As I'm sure you can tell, her name, JonBenét, is a combination of her father's first and middle name, JonBenét, and JonBenét's middle name is actually Patricia after her mother. In 1991, the Ramseys moved from Georgia to Boulder, Colorado for John Ramsey's job. In 1989, John Ramsey had formed the Advanced Product Group, which later merged with 2 other companies to become Access Graphics, which is a computer services company that was a subsidiary of Lockheed Martin. If you didn't know, Lockheed Martin is a aerospace, arms, defense, information security, and technology corporation. Eventually, John became president and CEO of Access Graphics, and in 1996, Access Graphics grossed over $1 billion. About a week before Christmas in 1996, an article was published about the success the company had, and John Ramsey was actually named Entrepreneur of the Year by the Boulder Chamber of Commerce. So it was definitely well known that the Ramsey family was well off. They lived in a really nice house in Boulder, and this was public information that John's company had been doing so well. Patsy Ramsey, who I mentioned had participated in beauty pageants when she was younger, started entering her daughter JonBenét in some beauty contests. JonBenét actually won a few titles before the age of 6. A lot of people talk about how this was Patsy pushing this on JonBenét, and while that might be true to some extent, there's also a lot of reports that JonBenét really enjoyed doing these pageants. In a Discovery Plus documentary, John Ramsey talked about how JonBenét loved doing the pageants and that she'd be the one dragging her mom to all of them. So in December 1996, JonBenét was 6 years old, living with her family in Boulder, Colorado. And Christmas was quickly approaching, and that is where our story really begins. On December 25th, 1996, JonBenét received a bike for Christmas, and then that evening, the family headed to a friend's house named Fleet White for an evening Christmas party. After the Christmas party, the family returned home, put the kids to bed, and that was the end of Christmas. At 5:30 a.m. on December 26th, Patsy Ramsey woke up, went downstairs to begin making her coffee, but as she was going down the stairs that led from the upstairs down to the kitchen, she found a note. This was a ransom note, and it claimed that JonBenét had been kidnapped. This note was handwritten and 2.5 pages long, and I will go into it a little bit more in a minute, but it requested $118,000 for JonBenét's safe return. The note specifically said, "You will withdraw $118,000 from your account, $100,000 will be in $100 bills, and the remaining $18,000 in $20 bills." And this note informed them to not call police, and like I said, I'll go through it more in a minute, but basically, this note was saying, "We kidnapped your daughter, we need this money." So Patsy pretty much immediately called 911 at 5:52 a.m. and here is the 911 call.
911 emergency.
Police.
What's going on?
By 515th Street.
What's going on there, ma'am?
We have a kidnapping. Hurry, please.
Explain to me what's going on, okay?
There's a note left and our daughter's gone.
A note was left and your daughter is gone? How old is your daughter?
6 years old. She's gone. 6 years old.
How long ago was it?
I don't know. I just found the note. And my daughter's
Does it say who took her?
What?
Does it say who took her?
I don't know. There's a ransom note here.
It's a ransom note?
It says SBTC. Victory. Please.
Okay, what's your name? Are you
Patsy Ramsey. I'm the mother. Oh my God. Please.
I'm sending an officer over, okay?
Please.
Do you know how long she's been
No,
gone?
I don't. Please, we just got out. Is she right here? Oh my God, please.
Okay,
Please, there's somebody.
I am, honey.
Please.
Take a deep breath away,
Please,
okay?
hurry.
Patsy.
So before 6 a.m. that morning, within just a few minutes of the 911 call, police arrived at the Ramsey house. Police officer Rick French was the first officer to get there that day, and he began doing an inspection of the house. He was basically looking around to see if there was any signs of forced entry. During this search, French went down to the basement, and he came up to a door that was secured by a wooden latch. He later explained that at this time, he was basically looking for any way that a kidnapper could have escaped the house. And because this door was latched from the inside, he figured out that this wouldn't have been a way that the killer escaped, so he walked away from the door. Family, friends, victim advocates, and the family's minister started arriving at the house to help support the family during this terrifying time. JonBenét's room was cordoned off to prevent any contamination, but the rest of the house was free range, and there were up to 18 people walking around the house that day. John Ramsey began making arrangements to pay the ransom, and at 8 a.m., Boulder Police Detective Linda Arndt arrived at the scene. The note had said that between 8 and 10 a.m., the kidnappers would be calling with instructions, so she arrived in anticipation of that, but that call never came, and Linda later shared about how weird it was that nobody in the home acknowledged that that call just never came. A couple of hours later, tensions were high, nobody knew what was going on, and Linda asked Fleet White, the family's friend, and John Ramsey to search the house top to bottom to see if they could find anything. They began their search in the basement, and John Ramsey went over to that wooden latch door that I said that Officer French had not looked inside earlier that day. And when he opened the door, he found something horrific. This room was a little room in the basement that the family called the cellar. And when John Ramsey opened the door, he found laying there on the floor his daughter. He could see that her mouth had duct tape over it, her wrists were tied with a nylon rope, and there was a white blanket over her torso. In the Discovery Plus documentary, John Ramsey shared that at first he was relieved to see his daughter because he thought that they had found her, but he quickly realized that something was not right. He ripped the duct tape off of her mouth and then picked her up, carrying her up the stairs screaming. Once he laid her back down upstairs, everybody realized that JonBenét was no longer alive. And this movement definitely contaminated the crime scene even more, but that we'll talk about a little bit more later. After JonBenét's body was found, the Ramseys were extremely cooperative. They each provided handwriting, hair, and blood samples, but they did not really want to talk to the police right away. On December 29th, just 3 days after the murder, the Ramseys flew down to Atlanta, Georgia to be with family. On December 31st, a funeral for JonBenét was held at the family's old church in Georgia, and JonBenét was laid to rest in Marietta, Georgia. She was buried next to her older half-sister Elizabeth, who had died in a tragic car accident in 1992. Okay, so next we're going to go through the autopsy results, and just a trigger warning, we will be, discussing murder and cause of death and all of that, and also potential child sexual assault. So the autopsy basically revealed that JonBenét had been killed by a skull fracture and strangulation. Her official cause of death was asphyxia by strangulation associated with craniocerebral trauma, and her manner of death was ruled homicide. There were no signs of conventional sexual assault found on JonBenét, but there were signs of some sort of trauma. Sexual assault could not be fully ruled out from what was found. There was evidence of injury to her genitals, and a pathologist also said that it looked like something had been wiped away from her genital area. A nylon cord was also found basically around JonBenét's neck, and this was later ruled to be what strangled her. The cord was basically a makeshift garrote that was made out of that nylon cord and the broken end of a paintbrush. Part of the bristle end of the paintbrush was later found in Patsy Ramsey's, paint supply tub, but the other broken end was never found despite extensive searches of the home. The autopsy also revealed that a vegetable or fruit that may represent pineapple was found in JonBenét's body, and because of the level of digestion, it was determined that that had been eaten after they got back from the Christmas party. Photographs of the Ramsey home from December 26th showed a bowl of pineapple on the kitchen table with a spoon in it, but John and Patsy said they never put the bowl on the table or fed the pineapple to JonBenét. Police later shared that they found Burke Ramsey's fingerprints inside the bowl. And again, we will talk about this a little bit more later. Okay, so back to the timeline of the investigation. On January 1st, 1997, Patsy and John Ramsey did a 45-minute media interview with CNN, and police found this kind of odd because they had said that they were too emotionally distressed to speak with police, but they then went and did this media interview. But to be fair, we don't know. Everybody reacts differently to traumatic events, and we don't know how we'd react. So I want to share a small part of the interview with you guys because police had basically been sharing that they didn't believe that there was a killer out there, but this is what Patsy said. On January 3rd, 1997, the Ramseys headed back to Boulder, and that same day, police went up to Michigan to search the family's summer home that they had up there. And this is around when more information about the ransom note came out, so we're going to dive into that now. First of all, detectives were able to determine that the ransom note had been written on a notepad that was already inside the house using a pen that was already inside the house. They also were able to determine that the person that wrote the ransom note had apparently kind of done a practice or draft note before they wrote the actual note. The note was handwritten and 2.5 pages long, which according to experts is extremely long for a ransom note. The note starts out, "Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. We respect your business, but not the country it services. At this time, we have your daughter in our possession. She is safe and unharmed, and if you want her to see 1997, you must follow our instructions to the letter." And then, as I mentioned earlier, it explained how the money should be retrieved. Okay, Let's talk about this dollar amount requested because this is super interesting. John Ramsey pointed out to police on December 26th that $118,000 was almost the exact amount that he had received as a Christmas bonus the year before. John Ramsey's 1995 Christmas bonus, which was paid out to him in February 1996, was in the amount of $118,117.50. This was also listed on every pay stub that he received from February 1996 forward. So technically anybody that saw his pay stubs could know this amount. So obviously this seemed very odd because it was a very random amount. It wasn't 100,000, 200,000, even 125,000 would make more sense, but 118,000 is just a very random amount for a stranger that knows nothing about the Ramseys to come in and request. So obviously police found this suspicious and they did look into if somebody that John worked with could be a suspect. And when we go through all of the suspects later, I will touch back on that. The note, despite there being a practice draft, had editing mistakes, things crossed out, carets to add in words. So it was just very weird. And the remainder of the note after telling the money amount kind of just rambled on, saying if you don't do what we say, JonBenét will be killed. At the end, it said, "Don't try to grow a brain, John. Don't underestimate us, John. Use that good Southern common sense of yours." And the last line said, "It is up to you now, John. Victory, SBTC." So a couple of things. It was straight directed at John. It was addressed to John, Mr. Ramsey, and throughout the note, it referenced John's name multiple times. The SBTC at the end is also very bizarre, and there's been some speculation about what that could stand for, ranging from something having to do with religion to the acronym for John's naval unit, but it's never really been determined what that stood for. The only fingerprints found on the ransom note were Patsy's and the authorities that had handled it that morning, so nothing of value could be lifted in that sense. There's been some analysis done on the ransom note, and there is one website that I will put on the screen here that did a very good in-depth analysis of the note, and I just want to point out a couple of things from that analysis. It talked about that the way that the letters were written was very bizarre, especially the A's and the T's. They seemed to change throughout the note, and I know not everyone's handwriting is always completely consistent, but it seemed to change a good amount. As you can see on the screen here, the way that the A's and the T's are written did change throughout the note, and it almost looked like somebody was trying to disguise their handwriting, and then as the note went on, their hand got tired and they got more into their natural handwriting. The Ramseys have done multiple handwriting tests over the years, and this included even writing out the entire note, which, as you can imagine, could be extremely traumatic for them. In March 1997, a handwriting analysis was able to officially exclude John from a suspect of writing the note, but it was never able to definitively say whether or not Patsy could have written the note. Basically, it didn't say that Patsy was the one who wrote it, but it also didn't say that she wasn't the one who wrote it. A federal court did eventually rule that it was unlikely that Patsy wrote the note, but again, she has never officially been definitively excluded. So as I've kind of touched on, there were some errors made in the investigation, and this included not blocking off the entire house from the start, having multiple people coming in and out of the house. Also, how John picked JonBenét's body up and ran up the stairs that could have contaminated any potential evidence that would have been found on or around her body. There was also a lot of evidence that was shared with the Ramseys from the get-go, and this could definitely contaminate the integrity of the investigation. The Boulder police were under a lot of scrutiny with this investigation, and they got a lot of criticisms. And while I can agree that they definitely didn't do everything correctly, I think some of the criticism isn't necessarily the most fair. A lot of this criticism comes from the Ramseys, who basically say that the Boulder Police Department was set on them being the murderer from the get-go. They basically say how the Boulder Police Department believed it was them from day one and didn't investigate anyone else, but that's actually not true. By the end of 1997, there were over 1,600 persons of interest in the case, and there were multiple people who had been questioned and investigated. They actually didn't interview the Ramseys until 4 months after JonBenét's death, and in the time between that, they interviewed all different types of people, investigated all different types of people, from people John worked with to people who were involved in pageants, just all different types of investigative avenues. So they definitely did focus on the Ramseys, but they didn't completely disregard the rest of the investigation. In March 1997, the police once again headed out to the Ramseys' summer home in Michigan. This time they were specifically looking for some type of handwriting from Patsy that wasn't specifically for a handwriting analysis. They were looking for her natural handwriting, but as far as I could find, there was nothing ever reported to be found from that. In early April 1997, some DNA analysis began, and on April 19th, 1997, the Ramseys officially became the prime suspects for the Boulder Police Department's investigation. On April 30th, John was interviewed for 2 hours and Patsy was interviewed for over 6 hours. Statements that the Ramseys made in April 1997 basically replaced anything that they had said early on in the investigation. On May 14th, 1997, DNA test results came back as no surprise, but they never really specified what they meant by that. In the summer of 1997, the Ramseys spent some time at their Michigan home before officially moving out of their home in Boulder. As I mentioned, by the end of 1997, there were over 1,600 persons of interest in the case, and around this time, police also asked the Ramseys to hand over any clothing that they had been wearing the night that JonBenét died. However, they did not do so until January 29th, 1998, and at this time, they handed over 2 shirts, a pair of pants, and a sweater. Burke Ramsey was also officially questioned in June 1998, but at that time, nothing of significance seemed to come from that interview. So at this point, the Boulder police are basically investigating this as if the Ramseys are suspects, but the Boulder County DA was not so set on that. Eventually, the case was handed over to the DA's office, and the DA, Alex Hunter, hired another investigator to look into this, basically under the assumption that the Ramseys were innocent. So Alex Hunter hired a retired detective named Lou Smith to assist the Boulder County DA's office with the case. Smith was a retired detective that came out of retirement for this, and he was going to basically reinvestigate the entire case under the assumption that the Ramseys were innocent. In May 1998, his findings were presented to the Boulder County Police, and from his investigation, all of the evidence pointed to the Ramseys not being involved. So at this point, it's pretty evident that the DA's office's conduct is basically kind of protecting and shifting the blame away from the Ramseys. And I'm not saying that this is necessarily right or wrong, but I think the Boulder police and the DA both were just on completely opposite sides of the spectrum when it came to who they thought was guilty, and a proper investigation was not really able to be done. The DA, Alex Hunter, even told a friend of his that he didn't believe the Ramseys did it, which is fine if you have your own opinion, but when you're in a position of power like that and are investigating the case, I don't necessarily think you should create that opinion from the start, but that's just my opinion. Another interesting point here is that the people running the DA's office at the time of JonBenét's murder were actually friends and former colleagues with John Ramsey's lawyer. So just something else to bring up. John Ramsey was definitely had friends in high places, and he was a big businessman in this county, so people knew him, and it definitely feels like the DA's office was completely trying to shift blame away from them, while the Boulder Police Department was trying to do a proper investigation. We'll go through some of Lou Smith's suspects later on, but I did want to mention that he eventually ended up resigning from the investigation because he believed that other investigators had incompetently overlooked the intruder theory. So like I said, we will go through a bunch of his suspects a little bit later on, and there's also an awesome podcast, I'll put the name on the screen here, that talks about all of his suspects. So because of the animosity between the DA's office and the Boulder County Police Department, the Colorado Governor Roy Romer named Michael Cain as a special prosecutor to initiate a grand jury. On March 12th, 1998, the grand jury investigation was called, and it began in September 1998. By October, they were beginning to hear forensic evidence, and this is super interesting because these are some of the only people in the world who have ever heard all of the evidence in this case. This grand jury hearing continued on for quite some time. In March 1999, Burke Ramsey was secretly questioned by the grand jury, and he was officially declared at this time as a witness only, not as a suspect. And then on October 13th, 1999, the district attorney declared there was not sufficient evidence to charge anyone in JonBenét's murder. He publicly said that the grand jury had completed its work and that no charges were going to be filed. He even said, quote, "I and my prosecution task force believe we do not have sufficient evidence to warrant the filing of charges against anyone who has been investigated at this time." So at this point, the public basically assumed that the grand jury had chosen not to file any charges. However, that is not the truth. It was revealed years later that the grand jury had actually voted to indict both John and Patsy Ramsey of child abuse resulting in death and as accessories to first-degree murder. So, in 2013, Judge J. Robert Lowenbach ordered the release of 4 pages of sealed documents from the grand jury investigation 14 years earlier. It's basically 2 pages about John Ramsey and 2 pages about Patsy Ramsey. These show that the jury had sought to charge each parent with 2 identical counts. The grand jury alleged that Patsy and John did, quote, "permit a child to be unreasonably placed in a situation which posed a threat of injury to the child's life or health, which resulted in the death of JonBenét Ramsey." Of course, John's attorney, L. Lynn Wood, came out and said that this was ridiculous and that they wanted the entire document to be released because this was just the part where they said what charges they wanted to be filed, not all of the evidence that they saw. Wood also said that the grand jury didn't have evidence that in 2008 led the new DA to exonerate the Ramseys, and we'll talk about that in just a second. A Denver legal analyst actually said that a DA not endorsing a grand jury's charge is, quote, "exceptionally rare." And to be clear, the indictments show that a majority of the grand jurors felt there was a probable cause to charge the parents. It doesn't explicitly say that they believe the parents are guilty or beyond a reasonable doubt they believe the parents did it. It's saying that there's enough evidence to charge them and go to trial. But the DA at that time, Alex Hunter, chose not to pursue charges. And in my eyes, he honestly made it seem to the public that the jury had not filed an indictment. But that's not true. In 2002, a new Boulder County DA came in and her name was Mary Lacey. She took over the investigation from police, and in 2003, Lacey agreed with a federal judge that evidence in the case was, quote, "more consistent with a theory that an intruder murdered JonBenét than it was with a theory that the Ramseys did it." And then in 2008, a huge announcement came, and honestly, it changed the course of the case in the public's eyes, in my opinion. On July 9th, 2008, the DA's office announced that as a result of newly developed DNA sampling and testing techniques, the Ramsey family members were excluded as suspects in the case. So with this, Lacey publicly exonerated the Ramseys. And that's the evidence that I was saying that John Ramsey's lawyer, when the court documents came out in 2013, he was saying that grand jury in 1999 didn't have this evidence that exonerated the Ramseys. So let's talk briefly about that new DNA evidence. As I'm sure you're aware, DNA technology always is improving. And as it improved over the years, a lot came out about potential evidence that was on JonBenét's body. At first, most of it was just JonBenét's DNA, but as time went on, they found traces of other unidentified DNA. According to reports, there are traces of at least 6 unidentified DNA samples on JonBenét's body. And it's been found that these DNA sources were not family members and that they were both male and female. However, this does not prove or disprove that the Ramseys or anyone else did or didn't do it. The Ramseys have used this to say that they are exonerated, that they're not the ones that did this. And that partially is coming from the DA exonerating them because of this evidence. But experts say that unless you are willing to accept that 6 people could have been involved in JonBenét's death, you can't use this DNA evidence as anything of value. The quantity of DNA is so small, and it's impossible to know how or when any of these foreign DNA traces were deposited. So realistically, this doesn't prove or disprove any theory. After this, though, the case pretty much went cold, but in 2010, the Boulder Police Department officially reopened the cold case. No real movement came after this, though, and subsequent DAs and other investigators have continually said that Mary Lacy's public exoneration of the Ramseys should not have been done. In 2015, the Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner stated that he disagreed with the exoneration of the Ramseys. He said, quote, "Exonerating anyone based on a small piece of evidence that has not yet been proven to even be connected to the crime is absurd." To support this, the former DA investigator Gordon Coombs questioned the full exoneration of the Ramseys as well, saying, quote, "We all shed DNA all the time within our skin cells. It can be deposited anywhere at any time for various reasons that are benign. To clear somebody just on the premise of touch DNA, especially when you have a situation where the crime scene wasn't secure at the beginning, really is a stretch." So this isn't saying that the Ramseys did it, but this is basically just saying that you can't say that they didn't do it just based on this DNA evidence that Mary Lacy used to publicly exonerate them. In September 2016, it was officially being reported that JonBenét's death was an active and ongoing investigation. Okay, 2 more quick things, and then we are going to dive into the suspects and the theories in this case. First of all, in March 2000, the Ramseys published a book. This was called The Death of Innocence, and it detailed their daughter's murder. In May of that year, they held a press conference, and during this, they claimed that lie detector tests had cleared them, but these lie detector tests were not conducted by the FBI or any other officials in, the law enforcement world, and so it's unclear where this came from. And then on June 24th, 2006, at 49 years old, Patsy Ramsey passed away of ovarian cancer. She had been diagnosed back in 1993, and in 2006, she passed away, and she was buried next to her daughter in Georgia. Okay, now we're gonna get into all the theories. There are 2 major theory groups in this case. First, there's the family theory that somebody in the family was involved, and then there's the intruder theory. We're going to go through the intruder theory first, and a lot of this comes from Lou Smith's investigation. If you remember, I mentioned him earlier, and he is the investigator, the retired detective that came out of retirement when he was hired by the DA, Alex Hunter, to look into this case, basically under the assumption that the Ramseys did not do it. Lou Smith unfortunately passed away in 2010, but by the time he passed away, he had collected a whole bunch of evidence, done interviews, and had a big list of suspects. And according to his daughter, as he was at the end of his life, he was convinced that one of the suspects on that list that he had was JonBenét's killer. Okay, the first person we're going to talk about is Santa Claus. A man named Bill McReynolds was investigated as he had interacted with JonBenét before her death. He had been hired by Patsy Ramsey to play Santa Claus at the family's Christmas parties in both 1995 and 1996, and he had a kind of interesting connection with JonBenét. He told the Denver Post that when he first met JonBenét, he was struck by her smile, and he also talked about how she had given him a vial of gold glitter that she called fairy dust, and that he used that as good luck. Both McReynolds and his wife Janet were questioned in relation to JonBenét's death. It was actually discovered that years prior, on December 26, 1974, McReynolds' 9-year-old daughter and her friend were kidnapped. The daughter had witnessed the sexual abuse of the friend, and thankfully she was not violated, and they were both returned. But this made a lot of people suspicious and question McReynolds because of the similarities between the two. They were both, both crimes happened right around Christmas, same age kid. same kind of thing, so it just made a lot of people very suspicious. Both Bill and Janet submitted hair, blood, and handwriting samples, and by DNA, they were officially cleared. It was also discovered that Bill had had heart surgery not long before JonBenét's death, so it's believed he wouldn't be strong enough to commit this crime. And he maintained his innocence until his death in 2002. Next up, we have Gary Oliva, a known sex offender in Boulder around the time that JonBenét died. He allegedly had a shrine in his apartment for JonBenét, and when he was arrested for drug charges in the year 2000, police allegedly found a magazine cutout of JonBenét's photo in his backpack. There was also a friend of Gary Oliva named Michael Vale who said that not long after JonBenét's murder, Oliva had come to him and said, quote, "I hurt a little girl." There's one reporter that also claimed to speak with Gary Oliva in jail, and she says that Oliva said he wouldn't talk with her unless she brought him a photo of JonBenét. Through DNA testing, he was cleared as a suspect, but some people do still believe he is a viable suspect. The third suspect is Michael Helgoth, and he was an electrician that worked in a nearby auto salvage yard. He was apparently tied to a property dispute that involved the Ramseys, so this is believed to be his potential motive. A friend of Helgoth's also claimed that he believed that Helgoth killed JonBenét. In 1997, there was a press conference where the DA came out and said, "Whoever did this, we are going to find you, we're zeroing in on you," and 2 days after this, Michael Helgoth was found dead. Helgoth died before anybody could speak to him, and his death is officially ruled a suicide, but some people believed he was murdered. By DNA, he was also cleared, but a lot of people are still suspicious of this, especially because of his suspicious death. And then in 2006, there was a man who actually confessed to JonBenét's murder. John Mark Carr was a former school teacher who had been living in Thailand after facing child pornography charges in the US. He had reached out to a University of Colorado Boulder professor named Michael Tracy about JonBenét. Tracy had been working on a documentary on JonBenét's case, but soon Carr's emails became very weird. Tracy reported Carr, and Carr was found and arrested in Thailand and brought back to Boulder for questioning. Carr confessed in graphic detail to a sexual assault and the murder, and he also had a series of diary entries that allegedly was written from the scene of the crime. And in this, he claimed that JonBenét died in, quote, "a love game gone wrong." And that's all I'm going to say about that because it's really, really creepy and gross. But this guy confessed. However, the confession was eventually determined to be false. Detectives ultimately were unable to even prove that Carr was in Boulder at the time of the murder, and DNA testing did not match. Next, we have the family's housekeeper, Linda Hoffman. Her husband, Mervyn, was also the Ramseys' handyman, and she was known to carry a set of keys to the home. During the investigation, she was not quiet about her suspicion of Patsy Ramsey. With that, Patsy claimed to investigators that Hoffman was struggling for money and had asked for a loan of several $1,000s, which Patsy declined to give her. So this theory alleges that she brought JonBenét down to the basement to try to get fake ransom money from the Ramseys. She could have known John's Christmas bonus amount, and she knew the family's schedule and home, so that's why people believe she could be involved. She also didn't have an alibi because she was just asleep at home with her husband that night. She gave her fingerprints and handwriting samples that did not match, and she even testified in front of the grand jury for 8 hours. She has never been formally accused of the crime, and nothing I could find show that any DNA matches. As I mentioned earlier, the ransom money requested was a very specific amount. So because of this, Lou Smith looked into business associates of John Ramsey's. There were 2 specific people that Lou Smith looked into. The first is an unnamed man, and his company had gone bankrupt because of John's company, Access Graphics. From what I could find, he's never done any handwriting or DNA samples, and he's never really been looked into by investigators other than Lou Smith. He has been accused of molestation, but he went to court for this, and it turned out to be his ex-wife filing fake charges against him, and a judge declared that none of them were true, so those charges don't really mean much. But he's never been really officially charged or really ruled out by police. Next up, we have a woman by the name of Sandra Henderson. John had fired Sandra after she was caught embezzling money. According to that podcast that I mentioned earlier, and I'll put the name here on the screen again, Sandra Henderson was the ops manager of Henderson Technology, and this company was ordering equipment from Axis Graphics. In 1991, Axis Graphics determined that they had not been paid $145,000 by Henderson Technology. Sandra's husband, Bud Henderson, claimed that he was unaware of the unpaid invoices despite his signature being on the notes. So he claimed his wife must have been the one who forged his signature, and he was unaware what was going on. It was later discovered that Sandra had tried to alter the Henderson Tech accounts at Axis Graphics to remove the unpaid balance. So John Ramsey fired Sandra after this, and things definitely got a little messy with outstanding balances, and Sandra and Bud actually ended up getting divorced, so it got even more complicated. Sandra eventually went on and did this at another company and was arrested for it. And it's believed by some that Sandra felt John ruined her life, so this could be a potential motive. The Hendersons became a prime suspect on Lou Smith's list, but the Boulder Police Department have said that the Hendersons are not a suspect in their investigation. There's one other kind of little grouping of suspects in the intruder theory, and that is people who may have seen JonBenét at a pageant. So Lou Smith looked into anybody who may have been inappropriately watching girls at pageants, any predators that may have seen JonBenét at pageants and decided to do something. There's never been anyone named or any official charges, but a lot of people believe that somebody in that world could have been JonBenét's killer. Okay, we're now going to switch gears and go into the family theory. And this is kind of the idea that the family staged the crime scene to look like something it was not. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the evidence that I haven't talked about yet. First of all, the Ramseys' story changed from what they initially told investigators the day JonBenét went missing to their official interview 4 months later. At first, they said that they came home, the kids were awake, they did some things. John said he put a toy together for Burke, and then eventually they put the kids to bed. But they later said that JonBenét fell asleep on the way home and they just brought her straight up to bed. But we know that can't be true because the pineapple found in JonBenét's stomach was not digested enough to be eaten before the party. It had to be eaten after the party when they got home. Patsy also initially said that JonBenét was in like red pajamas, but when she was found, she was actually in the white shirt that she had worn to the party. She also still had jewelry on from the party, and her hair was still tied up in the same ponytail from the party. So this theory kind of tells a story. This says that JonBenét came home, ate some pineapple, and then some sort of assault happened that led to JonBenét's death. Depending on which theory you look at, it could be a sexual assault or a physical altercation that left her brain dead, basically. She hit her head on something after some sort of altercation, and this left her brain dead. But because there were other marks on her, or just because whoever did it freaked out, it was decided that it would be staged as a kidnapping. A makeshift garrote was made and that nylon cord was put around her neck. What's super interesting about this is the amount that the nylon cord was tightened wouldn't normally kill JonBenét, but because she had sustained a blow to the head, she didn't have as much oxygen flowing, and so it did kill her at the level it was tightened to. Also, the nylon rope around her wrists was loose enough for her to slip her hands out, so it's unlikely that she was actually tied up and restrained while she was alive, or at least while she was conscious. Also supporting this theory is the clothing that JonBenét was wearing. As I mentioned, she was still wearing the white shirt that she had worn to the Christmas party, and her pants and underwear from the party were found strewn on her bedroom floor as if she had began undressing. The clothes that she was found in on her lower half seemed to be taken from the lower levels of the house. First of all, the underwear that she was wearing was several sizes too big, and Patsy later claimed that that underwear had been purchased for a relative as a Christmas gift. And if you remember, she was found in what the Ramseys called the cellar down in the basement, and that's actually where the Ramseys kept their Christmas presents. So it's believed that after JonBenét died, after she was killed, the underwear were just grabbed and put on her from that Christmas present pile. This could have been an attempt to cover up what actually happened, whether that be a sexual assault or to make it look like she had been asleep in bed when she was taken. Also, the long johns that she was wearing that night were an old pair of Burke's long johns that were pretty worn out, and they were also a few sizes too small for her. There are photos of the house that day, and on the spiral staircase there was a trash bag, and some people speculate that inside of that trash bag were clothes that were meant to be donated. So these long johns may have been in that, meant to be donated, and somebody grabbed them and put them on her, again, to either cover up some sort of sexual assault or to make it look like she had been kidnapped from bed. So this all points to somebody inside the house staging this scene, and there's a lot of speculation about who. Before I get into this, I want to say that I am not accusing anybody. I am just sharing facts and sharing my own opinion. And this is all alleged. Nothing has ever been officially proven, and no one has ever been officially charged. So there was nothing ever conclusive found from fingerprints on the garrote or the nylon rope or anything else around JonBenét. But fiber evidence found on some of these things does potentially point to Patsy Ramsey. Fibers from Patsy Ramsey's jacket that she was wearing that night are connected to several pieces of key evidence in the case. This includes the tub where the paintbrush was from, tied into the nylon rope, and on the duct tape. Now, at first, Patsy claimed that she wasn't wearing that jacket that night, but it was later proven that she was through photos from the Christmas party. Also, at first, Patsy tried to explain it as when JonBenét was brought upstairs, she threw herself onto JonBenét's body, and that's how the fibers could have transferred. But there's two things wrong with this. One, she wasn't wearing that jacket that day, and two, the fibers were also connected to the duct tape, which was left downstairs after John Ramsey ripped it off of JonBenét's mouth. Patsy Ramsey is widely believed to be at fault in JonBenét's murder, and she has definitely been the Boulder Police Department and the FBI's kind of main suspect through the case. On top of that fiber evidence, her handwriting has never been able to be excluded as the potential handwriting of the murder of the ransom note author, but it's also never been definitively linked to her. So all of this doesn't prove that Patsy Ramsey was the killer, but it definitely is compelling. There's one really interesting theory behind this, and this has to do with Patsy Ramsey basically getting angry at JonBenét for something. And this something may be either wetting the bed or having some sort of potty training issue. It was known that JonBenét was a bedwetter. So one theory is that potentially JonBenét wet the bed, Patsy got angry and accidentally did something where JonBenét hit her head, and then she staged this cover up because she was terrified of what would happen. The Ramseys' housekeeper revealed during the investigation that on multiple occasions JonBenét had been punished for wetting the bed. And it was also kind of well known that JonBenét wasn't fully potty trained at 6 years old. People also report that at 6 years old, JonBenét would still ask adults to help wipe her after going to the bathroom, and maybe something like this could explain the injuries in JonBenét's genital area. So the pathologist said that the injuries, at least some of them, indicate that they were 10 days old. So this could be some sort of recurring type of physical abuse, whether it be intentional or accidental. That could explain the injuries and what looked like had been wiped away from her genital area in the autopsy, and it could also explain the big underwear and small long johns that were put onto JonBenét to try to cover that up. So this could be some type of physical abuse, even if it was inadvertent, that led to an accident that killed JonBenét. Again, this is all alleged, but this is just one theory that I found extremely compelling when doing my research. Now, the main detective on December 26th, Linda Arndt, believed that John Ramsey was JonBenét's killer. And of course, since he was the one that found JonBenét, a lot of people believe that he is suspicious, especially because he went straight to her body. Nothing was ever really proven with John. It was proven that he was not the one who wrote the ransom note according to handwriting analysis, and there's never been any definitive evidence linking John to JonBenét's murder. Finally, we'll talk about Burke Ramsey, and this is somebody that a lot of people believe to be JonBenét's murderer. At the time of JonBenét's murder, Burke Ramsey was 9 years old, and the night that JonBenét disappeared and was killed, Burke was said to be sleeping through the entire night, and he actually didn't wake up until well into the morning when detectives were already there. He was also pretty quickly removed from the house and went to a family friend's house that morning, so he really didn't know what was going on in the house. In 2016, a CBS documentary called The Case of JonBenét Ramsey aired, and they basically accused Burke of killing his sister. This is when that theory that he did it really took up, and the theory basically revolves around saying that Burke killed JonBenét, and then his parents, not wanting to lose their only remaining child, covered it up. However, there's a very weak forensic case linking Burke to JonBenét's murder. In that CBS documentary, a family friend of the Ramseys, Judith Phillips, claimed that Burke had a quick temper and that she had been told by Patsy that Burke had hit JonBenét Ramsey. So Phillips claims that she learned this just from Patsy telling her, not from a first-hand account. She didn't actually see this happen. And she also said that she only met Burke a handful of times, so she wouldn't necessarily know about his temper. Patsy and Burke both claimed that it was an accidental hit, that they were just playing in the yard, JonBenét was behind him, and he accidentally hit her. And in fact, a couple weeks after that, Burke had gotten hit by a baseball or something like that. So it seemed to just be an accident, not an intentional Burke hitting JonBenét like a lot of people believe. And despite this account, friends, neighbors, and nannies all claim that Burke did not have a bad temper. He was just a normal child. On top of this, Burke's story has actually remained very consistent over the years. As I mentioned, Burke was taken out of the house pretty early that morning, and detectives that spoke to him that day said that he appeared to have no idea that his sister was dead, and that he didn't really seem to comprehend the seriousness of what was going on. A child psychologist that interviewed Burke Ramsey also concluded that he was not a witness to the murder. Some audio enhancement of Patsy's 911 call has been done, and people claim they can hear Burke Ramsey in the background.
Patsy?
I have listened to it. I cannot hear it. I just don't think that you can take anything definitive from that, but just another thing to add in. And then comes the pineapple. Burke's fingerprints were found inside the bowl of pineapple and also on a glass of water next to it. And a lot of people believe that maybe JonBenét had tried to grab some of his pineapple and he shoved her and she fell, and that's how she hit her head. But we don't even know when that pineapple was put out. It could have been from earlier that day. The fingerprints of Burke inside the bowl could have been a previous fingerprint. There's no way to prove that that pineapple was eaten by Burke that night. There's just no way to prove that. And on top of this, Boulder police have shared on more than one occasion that Burke is not a suspect in the case. Okay, one more theory that is more on the intruder side that I want to talk about, because it has been getting a lot more attention recently, is the theory that somebody staying in one of the Ramseys' neighbors' basements could have been JonBenét's killer. So there's just not a lot of information out there on this, but here's kind of the gist that I was able to gather. This person was staying as a new guest in the neighbor's home, and they had been over to the Ramseys' house, so they would have known the layout of the house and they would have known the Ramseys, and JonBenét would have known them. So this basically says that this person would have come into the basement, killed JonBenét, and left her there. Again, no proof leading to this, but I did want to mention this because this is a theory that more and more people have been talking about. As we are now at the 25th anniversary of JonBenét's death, police are still determined to find her killer. In a statement made last week, the Boulder Police Department said that they have been working closely with state investigators on future DNA advancements. They said, quote, "As the department continues to use new technology to enhance the investigation, it is actively reviewing genetic DNA testing processes to see if those can be applied to this case moving forward." To date, there have been over 1,000 DNA samples analyzed and over 21,000 tips. As of December 2021, this investigation is still marked as ongoing and active. A lot of people are hopeful that familial DNA may lead to some movement in this case, as it has been used to help solve cases like the Golden State Killer. I remain extremely hopeful that DNA evidence will be able to find her killer. I'm not convinced of who I think did it. Personally, I believe that Patsy Ramsey was involved, but I'm not really sure to what extent. I don't really have a definitive decision on who I think was her killer, and I'm just as baffled as everyone else. Be sure to let me know down in the comments what you guys think, if you guys think it's the intruder theory or the family theory, and who you think may have been involved. I'm super curious to hear your guys' thoughts. And that's all I have for this video. I really wanted to cover this case on my true crime YouTube channel as I'm speaking into my dog with fur in my mouth now. But I really wanted to cover this case because it's such a big one, and I'm really curious to hear your guys' theories. So be sure to let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to leave a thumbs up on this video and hit that subscribe button. If you guys have case suggestions, you can leave them in the comments as well, or DM me on Instagram. You can follow me on Instagram and TikTok for more daily true crime news and updates. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye. Hi. Making it hard for mom? All right, let's go. Go on.